One thing that's been very noticeable with the rise of social media and 24-hour news over the last sort of decade is, of course, the rise of fake news and conspiracy theories. Now, the whole concept of conspiracy theories is not a new thing. It's always been around. I mean, on some level, any sort of big event, um, there's many famous examples. Of course, the Kennedy assassination, September 11th are probably the two most prominent examples, but also the sinking of the Titanic, death of Princess Diana, the moon landing in 1969, the first successful moon landing, that is, um, and a whole range of other things. They all attract theories that are beyond the sort of official explanation. Now, I'll be honest, I do find conspiracy theories interesting. Interesting insofar as you could look at certain things as having certain angles that maybe do require a bit more consideration and do raise questions. So I'm not someone who outright dismisses conspiracy theories. It's all mad. Let's just believe the official information. We know that even in open societies, even in democracies, there is there is things that are have been covered up in the past. There is in the corridors of power, there is definitely a potential and a capability for cover up. So I'm not so naive as to think in free societies, that is societies that don't have a single party system, um, everything's just nice and transparent and we know everything. That's not my position. It's never been my position. And certainly, if you look at something like the CIA, it's got a very, very murky record. There's no question about that. No question whatsoever. So I have no problem with people asking questions as a principle. But the danger with conspiracy theories is that when they go beyond just harmless questions, or I don't want to say harmless questions, when they go beyond questions to people obsessing that there must always be an alternative explanation, that there must always be an alternative version of events, it becomes almost like a cult like mentality in the sense that, oh, well, mainstream media is saying this, so the opposite must be true. The government saying this, so the opposite must be true. So people who go down that rabbit hole, they simply can't comprehend that the official version of events may actually be quite accurate. It has to be another explanation because, why would the government tell us the truth? There has to be something else. Now, what I find particularly alarming about conspiracy theories in recent years is how it is used by powerful regimes that have a very anti-West agenda. The most obvious example of this is the Russian Federation, but I do believe increasingly we'll see the Chinese regime using this as well. Up to now, what the Chinese state has been doing is putting out their propaganda, but they have stopped short of going to the full extent that Russian state media has gone of actually trying to stoke up anti-West conspiracy theories. But they're starting to do that now, and we've seen it with coronavirus, where the Chinese state, I'm not just talking about people on the internet, the Chinese state has endorsed conspiracy theories that the US military caused coronavirus. There's zero evidence for that, but they have endorsed those sort of claims, or at least they've done nothing to dissuade those claims, to the point where the US State Department actually summoned the ambassador to explain that. I think we should do likewise if we see CGTN. I mean, I'm really disillusioned with Ofcom for their failure to act against Arty and CGTN. In my opinion, they're both weapons of hostile foreign states that have no place on our shores. But what can I do? I've launched a petition, but I appreciate everyone who signs that, but Ultimately, it's Ofcom that has the power to remove the license from those networks, and they're failing to do so. And it really it's baffling. I do believe that it's possible that the Russian and Chinese embassies are putting pressure on them. And I'm not saying that as a fact, I don't know, but it's possible. Um, but if you look at the sort of opinions that you see on Russia today, I've spoken out about this network before because I detest it. But if you look at the sort of opinions, they tend to go along these lines. Oh, I support RT because it tells me the truth in the way mainstream media doesn't. Or nice balanced news source on like BBC or CNN. If you think that Russia today is balanced, you really, to put it bluntly, you are a complete fool. If you cannot see that Arty has a pro-Russian, anti-West agenda, you are a fool. This is what I would say about RT. One of the critiques is that the likes of the BBC won't cover such issues as, for example, the grooming gangs. Now, I do reserve a lot of criticism for the BBC on issues like that. I think that the sort of identity politics and political correctness that networks like the BBC and CNN have been endorsing for a long time are very detrimental. They're causing a lot more harm than good. But when RT reports, for example, about the grooming gangs, they're not doing it because they genuinely have concern for the victims. They're only doing it to say, oh, look how terrible British society is, and the British establishment's ignoring this. Now, you may say, well, the British establishment are ignoring it. And I would say, yes, they are. But that doesn't mean you need to support a hostile foreign agency that is simply lapping this up, exploiting it for their own gain. I mean, RT will never report about anything negative happening in Russia. They would never report if something similar was going on in Russia because RT is run by Russian ultranationalists. When I see when I see the sort of sheepish mentality that you get out there, I mean, an example of this would be the Tulsi Gabbard presidential campaign. Her supporters believe that anyone who questions her is a neocon because she'd had a military experience and she was talking about avoiding reckless wars, then she became the darling of conspiracy theorists. Oh, well, she's speaking out against the establishment, so she must be completely right. They seem to ignore the fact that this is a woman who visited Bashar Assad, one of the world's most blood drenched dictators, a man with hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths on his hands. She's never fully explained that. I mean, I'm pleased she's out of the presidential race. She never had a chance. But the fact is, her supporters just blindly believe this idea that she's some great pacifist. There's nothing pacifist about supporting a man like Assad. And to those who say, oh, she's not supporting him, as far as I'm concerned, visiting him legitimizes him. It doesn't matter if she sits on the fence and she says she neither supports him or condemns him. That's not good enough. It just isn't good enough for someone who aspires to be leader of the free world. If she cannot take a position against the barbaric human rights abuses that this dictator's been responsible for, it's I find it rather chilling actually that so many people are willing to believe Russian state media over independent human rights organizations. It just I just find it deeply depressing. Um, but then when you look in the United States, when you look at the sheer stupidity of people who lap up everything Alex Jones tells them, I mean, it would be easy to dismiss someone like Alex Jones as a fringe nut, but he has a lot of support. And then when the President of the United States sometimes outright endorses these conspiracy theories, any critique of him is fake news spread by the Democrats, we have actually a pretty dangerous situation. Now, am I saying that the Democrats aren't capable of being foolish and being biased? No, not at all. I think, for example, they need to back the president when it comes to China. So I think they're wrong about that. And CNN, can be incredibly biased. It can shamefully race bait. So I'm not saying CNN's perfect. I think there is some very strong ground to criticize CNN on. But that doesn't mean that everything they report, for example, about the president is wrong. When journalists quote Trump to his face and he calls them fake news, I mean, this is a dangerous situation. And unfortunately, Trump's base believe every single word he says, even though the man is a proven liar. I don't think that Trump is an asset to the Western world. I think the man is unstable. I don't think can be trusted to defend free societies. I mean, when it comes to China, I give Trump credit for its hard line. But the problem with Donald Trump is he's not a stable figure. You never quite know what he's going to come out with. So, whilst I want to see an American president recognizing the Chinese threat, and I think Trump's right about calling out the World Health Organization, they do need to answer questions. They do need to answer questions about their um, their relationship with China. And I think Democrats are wrong to focus and home in on that as some sort of racist thing. They need to be focusing on other areas to criticize Trump. When it comes to China, the Democrats need to show they too will be assertive with China. The fact of the matter is, the World Health Organization did endorse claims by Chinese officials that, for example, there would be no human to human transmission early on. The World Health Organization should never have done that. So I do think there are important questions to be asked of them, and I don't think Trump's wrong about that. My issue with Trump is I don't think he is a stable character. So whilst I will back him taking a tough line on China and its existential threat to the West, I don't trust Trump to really be consistent. I think if Trump thought that being pro China was good for business, I think he would do that. I'm not sure if the man really has any sincere concerns about human rights or anything like that. But as it stands, taking a tough line is better than not taking a tough line. So I think the Democrats need to really be careful that they don't end up as useful idiots for the Chinese regime. But on the wider issue of conspiracy theories, anyone who kind of takes, let's say, a more mainstream view of things is accused of being an establishment shill, is accused of being a warmonger, is accused of X, Y, and Z. And I have seen attitudes in the UK, people who hate the EU so much that they're perfectly willing to endorse Russian state media. I mean, let's make no mistake about it. Arty and the Russian Federation loves Brexit because they know how divisive it's been in this country. I'm not for a second, by the way, saying Brexiteers are pro-Russia. Many of them are not. Many of them are decent people who know that RT and Russia poses a threat to this country. But there are others who think that because RT is critical of the EU, then RT must be telling the truth and RT must be a reasonable website. What you need to understand about RT, this is not some brave little independent network that's a different voice from so called mainstream media. RT is part of the Russian state. It's mainstream. It's mainstream in Russia. Because in Russia, 95% of coverage is pro Putin. So, this idea that RT is some brave little whistleblowing website is complete nonsense. I've always had contempt for it, or rather, when I've started paying attention and seeing what this network is all about, I've had growing contempt for it because I can see through what they're doing. So when it comes to fake news, when it comes to people just blindly believing everything they read online, I would say just be a little bit assertive. Just look at more than one source. And don't believe every wild conspiracy theory you read. I would say that even about China. Now, I have utter contempt for the Chinese regime, but that doesn't mean I'm going to believe every single thing said about them. For example, I wouldn't necessarily believe that the Chinese regime has deliberately caused COVID 19. I wouldn't believe that. I think they're responsible for it with their cover up, but I don't think they deliberately created it. I don't think there's any hard evidence for that. But this is the problem. When you get a regime that isn't transparent, where a country's entire media is controlled by the state, as is the case in China, then it does make conspiracy theories more plausible because the nature of the communist regime is power, and that's all they're interested in. Now, you could argue that's true of every government in the world. Every government wants to maintain power, but the difference is in countries that have independent media, or you do have cover-ups, or you do have corruption, independent media can expose that. So if you're one of these people that really genuinely think that the situation in the United Kingdom or France is equivalent to the situation in Russia or China, you really aren't paying attention. You really aren't looking at what the situation is. Because wherever there is power, there is a potential for corruption. And you could say all politicians lie, but you simply cannot compare a society where you have a media that can openly question the government versus societies where the media is 100% controlled by the government. Now, in Britain, we have Corbin supporters who have it in their heads that anyone who doesn't agree with them is establishment. So they're already calling Keir Starmer a red Tory just because he's not as far left as they are. When you have that sort of black and white mentality, then you're going to believe anything. So we all have a responsibility to just think a little bit about what we're reading online and think, okay, is this really plausible? Let's look at other sources. Let's see if this is backed up by other sources. And I would say that every network, I mean, I'm not making this video to defend CNN or the BBC. I can think of many, many reasons to criticize them. You see, my thing is not don't criticize them. My thing is don't be a useful idiot for hostile foreign regimes by endorsing what they're saying. So just because RT reports something that the BBC doesn't suddenly make RT a reputable news site. RT frequently brings in so-called experts who are basically disgruntled ex-employees who have a bone to pick and they want to push conspiracy theories. Um, I believe RT is a weapon being used against the state. And the day that Ofcom finally gets its act together and takes away their license, I will celebrate because I genuinely see RT as being as dangerous as a cruise missile. It spreads disinformation, it spreads conspiracy theories, it has an anti West agenda, it has a pro Russian agenda. People need to wake up and stop being such fools and thinking it is reputable. You know, if you really hate the BBC, fine, but just don't endorse RT. Don't be so foolish.